Welcome to the presentation of our paper, Understanding the Continuity of Grand Challenges, a Routine Dynamics Perspective, here at Virtual EGOS 2021. This paper has been authored by Christian Maringer from the University of Stuttgart, Katrin Seele from Aalto University, Anja Danner-Schröder from TU Kaiserslautern, Thomas Griesel from the University of Liechtenstein, Waldemar Kremser from Radboud University, Birgit Renzel from the University of Stuttgart, and Bastian Wurm from the Vienna University of Economics and Business. This paper directly emerged out of a workshop format that we held at the Routines Research Community Meeting at the University of Stuttgart in February 2020. Very briefly speaking, we connect research on routine dynamics with the ongoing and ever more important discourse on grand challenges. Routine dynamics, as we argue, is a useful concept to understand why grand challenges persist through everyday actions in and of organizations, a perspective which has remained elusive so far. I may now pass on to Anja.
Thank you. So before we start to explain how organization routines can explain the continuity of grand challenges, we start with defining grand challenges. So grand challenges are massive social and environmental issues that have potential or actual negative effects on large number of people, communities, and the planet. The most universal and widely adopted grand challenges are, and I guess you're all quite familiar with that, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And it's so difficult to solve or tackle grand challenges because they share many features. So one is that grand challenges consist of many interrelated parts, for example, actions, actors, several organizations, and a lot of artifacts. And all these interrelated parts interact in unforeseeable ways. Moreover, grand challenges include different people with different and oftentimes contradictory viewpoints. And last, the future development of grand challenges is quite uncertain, so no one can predict how grand challenges develop over time. So far, research has usually tried to design interventions to tackle grand challenges. So for example, there are water programs, welfare programs, and many other examples. However, even the most successful interventions are far from having sustainable and global effects. Moreover, there are unintended and harmful side effects as well. So in sum, we can say that grand challenges are a rather persistent phenomena, and we refer to that characteristic as the continuity of grand challenges. But by continuity, we do not only mean that grand challenges persist over time, they also change over time. So grand challenge, or the form and the shape of grand challenges, can change over time. However, the grand challenge as such persists over time. So therefore, we suggest in that paper that before we start to understand how to tackle a grand challenge, we need to understand the continuity of grand challenges. And the theoretical perspective that is quite helpful here is probably routine dynamics, because routine dynamics has over the years explained how routines can contribute to stability and change at the same time. So therefore, our research question is, how can a routine dynamics perspective help understand how organizations contribute to the continuity of grand challenges? And now I pass on to Katrin.
Thank you. To illustrate our example, we have gone to microplastics, one of the biggest grand challenges that we're actually facing today. So plastics are obviously an important and essential part of our economy and also of our life. Yet, as they enter our ecosystems, they produce devastating effects on our environment and potentially also on human health. Recent studies have actually found that there is an increasing amount of plastic particles in our human bodies. 90% of plastics in our oceans are so-called microplastics. These are synthetic solid particles or polymers ranging from 1 micromillimeter to 5 millimeters. And all of these are insoluble in water. Now, these particles stem from different sources, such as synthetic textiles, also the abrasion of tires, but then, of course, also the degradation of larger plastic waste. Now, over the last 20 years, we have seen an additional source of microplastic in the environment, which stems from intentionally added microplastic in a wide range of products, such as cosmetics, household detergents, cleaning products, paint, fertilizers, and pesticide. While helpful in these products and really appreciated by consumers and companies as well, for example, to control viscosity or appearance, or also the stability of products, they accumulate in the environment, and increasingly they pollute terrestrial and freshwater environments. Now, a recent estimate by the European Chemicals Agency states that in the EU alone, about 145,000 tons of microplastics are intentionally added to products every year, and of those, about 42,000 tons are released uncontrolled into the environment. For those of you who are into football and will watch the Euro final on Sunday, you can fill the entire Wembley Stadium with 42 tons of microplastic every year. And with this, I pass on to Christian.
So how can we use routine dynamics to understand the continuity of grand challenges? When we look at the literature, we found 4 different concepts that are quite prominent in routine dynamics and that we think are helpful to better understand the continuity of grand challenges. These concepts are interdependence, social materiality, multiplicity, and granularity. Now I will talk about 2 of these concepts, that is interdependence and multiplicity. First, interdependence is a concept that has been quite prominent in routine dynamics research. And 2 parts or 2 entities are interdependent if one entity provides a relevant context for the other entity. So how can we use such a perspective or such a concept to understand grand challenges? We suggest that first we can identify or map the ecology network or cluster of interdependent routines. And then second, we can identify the processes through which interdependence between routines is enacted. I will briefly draw on the microplastics example to illustrate these 2 steps. So as Katrin has already mentioned, car tires are part of the problem of microplastics. And we can approach that problem by mapping the use of car tires in the economy. So we will find that there are routines that are used to produce car tires, routines in which car tires are then used, and then also routines through which car tires are transformed into crumbles. So this perspective kind of helps us to get a better glimpse of where the problem is situated. In a second step, we can then identify the processes through which interdependence between routines is enacted. So for instance, when we look at sports clubs, these sports clubs often use car tire crumbles, but the crumbles degrade over time and then go into the soil as microplastics. So sport clubs could try to avoid that by using coconut shells as an alternative material. However, they enact interdependence differently. For instance, they kind of break the interdependence with the producers of the car tire crumbles. So then we have to use these crumbles or the car tires differently. And they also enact interdependence with producers or routines that produce the coconut shreds and also transport these coconut shreds. And the problem here is that coconut shells are typically produced in very distant parts of the world. And so this could potentially increase the CO2 footprint of the sports club. A second concept that we suggest is multiplicity. Here we say that we can first identify how the parts involved in a grand challenge are different. And then we can identify processes through which similarity and difference are enacted. So for instance, when we look at the intentional use of microplastics in cosmetics, we can find that Greenpeace has a very different point of view as the cosmetic firms. For Greenpeace, microplastics is an environmental problem, while for cosmetic firms, microplastics is a matter of improving product quality. In a second step, we could then identify the processes through which difference and similarity are enacted. So for instance, when we look at the Greenpeace homepage, there's a recent report on the use of microplastics by cosmetic firms. Here, Greenpeace states that while most of the brands claim to have their plastic pollution problem under control, not one of them succeeded in meeting Greenpeace's environmental standards. So what we see in this statement is a process of enacting a difference between Greenpeace and the cosmetic firms. And now I'm going to pass on the ball to Birgit.
Okay, now we'd like to discuss the following aspects with you. So how are routine dynamics relevant to understand grand challenges? And are there any other concepts that could be relevant as well? What is the USP really of routine dynamics as an analytical lens? And finally, how do the concepts help your empirical research on grand challenges? Okay, so thank you for listening, and we are happy to connect and discuss these questions with you. Bye.